Hey guys, um, here's the video lecture that I promised. Um, if you have pulled up the PowerPoint for Chapter 4, Chapter 24, Lesson 3, um, it's on national and state democracy, and it kind of is dealing with the idea that after all of the fighting that we've seen in France and other parts of Europe, that essentially democracy is going to um, be really important. People are going to adopt more democratic systems, along with, I would say, even with monarchies, still opportunities for representation for people. So essentially, what I would do if I were you would be to open the PowerPoint for Chapter 24, Lesson 3, and follow along. Couple different things when we're looking at what's going on in Western Europe in terms of government. Great Britain has its parliamentary system. You also see at this time the emergence of political parties. And we talked a little bit about that with the French Revolution, liberals and conservatives, and what each side wanted. For liberals want more freedom, conservatives didn't want as much change. But in Great Britain, there is a focus more on ensuring um, that people have a voice. And so we see the development of this idea of a prime minister and ministerial responsibility where there's like a legislature that will have some power. In France, you're going to see, we saw the French Revolution, the first one. We saw the birth of a republic. France is also going to go through another revolution. By 1875, it will have another republic. And France is a republican form of government today with a legislature made up of two houses. And so that's kind of the trend, just so you know, is that there is, people are leaning more towards representative types of bodies. Now, that's not to say that you don't have um, absolute monarchies or authoritarian regimes, but the general direction that they're interested in going is more representation for the people. Italy also will have more of a democratic system, um, although they're going to have a tough time developing because with the emergence of a unified Italy around 1870, there was still a disconnect between the northern and southern parts of Italy, mostly because the north was wealthy and the south was rural, and there was a great discrepancy in wealth, which leads to corruption within the government. So Italy's going to have a little bit of a challenge. Um, when we're looking at um, Central and Eastern Europe, and we're on the slide that says Central and Eastern Europe, the Old Order, we need to look at number one, Germany. Germany was also born around the same time that Italy was. Remember that the German states tried to come together to unite first in the 1840s with the Frankfurt Assembly, and it didn't work. By 1870, though, it would work. Prussia, that up and coming power that we were talking about, leads unification of the German states. And so modern Germany is born. And the person who's really responsible for that is a guy named Otto von Bismarck. He worked for the Prussian Hohenzollern family for a long time, but it's really, he's the one that creates the German state. He also sets up a legislature, which is called the Bundesrat and the Reichstag. The lower house is the Reichstag, and you've probably heard about that before because the Reichstag in German history, especially if you studied about World War II, was the lower house of parliament that Hitler rose up through with the Nazi Party. So keep that in mind that while there is representation, often it's there's still a lot of power in the hands of the ruler. Germany at this time is, as a nation, has a monarchy as well. The ruler is, by 1888, Kaiser William II. Kaiser William II's, I think, father, Kaiser William I, worked directly with Bismarck to found Germany. But when Kaiser William I died, Kaiser William II forced Bismarck to resign, because the way I kind of explain it in class usually is that there can't be two sheriffs in town, essentially. So he forced Bismarck, who was really powerful actually as kind of his right hand man, forced him out, and Kaiser William II then begins to try to make Germany super strong in the same way that Great Britain and even the United States is strong. A super strong military. He wants some democracy. He also knows that it's important to take care of the workers, and because socialism was rising, so he will make some changes that actually help um, the factory workers and whatnot. Part of his in making Germany an industrial power um, benefits his shipbuilding. Um, the other thing that you'll see in terms of Germany is they're going to be really strong in the areas of science and synthetic chemicals and things like that. So, some of the most intelligent people at the turn of the century were from Germany. They were promoting a lot of science by World War II, though a lot of those people will have gone because some of them were Jewish, and that made it difficult for them to feel safe in Germany around that time. So Kaiser William II rules over Germany, um, and at this slide you can see that Otto von Bismarck and Kaiser William II are there, um, and they were, I think, in direct competition, and so Kaiser William II forced him out. By the way, the term Kaiser, as you hear it, also means Caesar. So that gives you an idea of the ambitions of the German rulers. So keep that in mind. Moving into another part of Eastern Europe, and one area that's super conservative still is going to be the Austrian Empire. Now, they reference it in the slide as the Austro-Hungarian Empire. That is the result of nationalist uprisings. Remember when we talked about the whack-a-mole game and how part of um, um, the Austrian Empire was, or there were so many ethnic groups within the Austrian Empire. There were a lot of uprisings. Austria was really, actually not Austria, what am I trying to say? Hungary was the only place within the Austrian Empire that managed to rise up and get some independence. And so it's not just the Austrian Empire now, it's called the Austro Hungarian Empire. And it was led by Francis Joseph, and you can see him on the slide um, where it says Central and Eastern Europe, the Old Order. Um, he's still super conservative, ruling by imperial decree, and the Austrian Empire is still like a whack a mole game. They're still working to try to hold it together. What's happening in Russia? Well, Russia, as you know, is super conservative, very much absolute monarchies, and Tsar Nicholas comes to power in 1894. Now, the interesting thing about his family members before him is that some of them were liberal. Some of them did, like that Alexander, if you watch the video on Alexander, part 16 and 17 in Russia, Land of the Tsars, you notice that he did try to implement some liberal reforms, which would have given the people more rights and freedoms and representation. But unfortunately, he was assassinated, and so the after Alexander The rest of the monarchs were pretty, they pulled in the reins, and they really focused on autocracy, or just ruling them for themselves and not really giving people much of a voice. So when Tsar Nicholas comes to power, he is like any other Romanov ruler who is, look at this hair, it's horrible. Any other Romanov ruler who was just interested in making decisions, and using divine right to make those decisions. When Nicholas comes to power, he is looking at Russia and wanting to industrialize it because everybody else is doing that. And you have to industrialize if you're going to have modern weapons and ships and all of those things. And so it was kind of a difficult decision, I think, for the Russians to do that, because with modern technology comes modern ideas. And so you'll see that um, industry also breeds socialism in Russia as well. The people weren't happy. There was a ton of poverty. The factories were just the people in the factories were overworked, and so by 1905, there was a demonstration which often is called Bloody Sunday. It is a demonstration of priests and workers carrying signs and banners that are of a religious nature. They are pleading with the czar to give them some rights and freedoms. There are prayers. They're holding candles. It's a very peaceful event, but unfortunately, and if you're going to the next slide, um, you're looking at um, uh, the soldiers firing on the protesters, and that becomes known as Bloody Sunday. And the czar isn't even home, and interestingly enough, he doesn't even respond to the um, upwards of possibly 1,000 deaths. And when he finally does respond, he says, "Okay, well, I guess I better give the people a representative body." And so that's what the Duma is. So if you're on the slide showing the firing on the crowd, that results in that's Bloody Sunday, and it results in a parliament essentially for the Russian people. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the people are going to have much say, but it feels a little bit better. Nicholas is going to be on a path towards, I would say, eventual destruction, because after Bloody Sunday in 1905, he's going to um, continue to get Russia into some problems. He's going to fight with the Japanese for control over part of Manchuria. Um, and so he's going to be defeated by the Japanese. It's called the Russo Japanese War. And mostly because the Russians hadn't industrialized enough to have ships that could fight against the Japanese Navy. And so that's an expense on top of kind of just dealing with these little riots and uprisings throughout the empire. So by the time we get to like World War One in 1914, Russia's in a really bad situation. A ton of poverty. There's still serfdom. No real representation for the people. They lost a war to the Japanese, and so it's going to be only a period of time before that entire family is going to be pushed out, and you'll see a new kind of leaders coming in. The next slide is about the United States. In a nutshell, we are looking at the United States between 1860 and 1914. The United States had dealt with a civil war, as you know, and this had destroyed the South. The Constitution is going to have to change to protect African Americans But as you know, African Americans are still going to have to fight for their civil liberties well into the 1960s. The United States industrializes late 18, early 1900s, and cities are going to grow. So larger cities, you're going to see less farming going on. The other thing that's kind of interesting about the United States is that you will see that it will become more, what would I say, imperialist. And what that means is the United States was looking to expand their control into lands abroad. So that's when, like, Hawaii is annexed by the United States. Hawaii was actually a monarchy. Puerto Rico, Guam, the Philippines, all of that is going to come under American control. And so the United States goes from this very destructive civil war to industrializing to becoming an imperialist power. And that's going to put them on the same, I guess, stage as other European power. Another thing that you're going to look at here, international rivalries. As more people are industrializing, you're going to see more competition. And with that competition, people are going to start taking sides and creating alliances. So you usually make an alliance with a group that is similar to yourself. So Germany will have an alliance with Austria, Hungary, and Italy, and that's called the Triple Alliance. And in response to that, France, Great Britain, and Russia will form their own alliance called the Triple Entente. So anytime you see people making alliances, it's bad news because it escalates things. And so you see those two sides with the Triple Alliance and the Triple Entente as kind of the foundation for who's going to take which side during World War One. Okay? And so the next slide is just showing you again who's on the Triple Alliance and who's on the Triple Entente. Okay? The last thing that's probably important to look at is the Balkan regions. And I'm probably going to discuss that with you in a separate lecture that will take us right into World War One. So make sure you do know that with the Balkan region, a lot of those areas are under Austrian control. The Balkans are made up of a lot of different Slavic peoples who don't want to be under Austrian control. So Serbia is at the center of the Balkan kind of crisis that they're talking about, and it's the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand by a Serbian who's essentially a Slavic place. Serbia wanted to create a greater Slavic nation. So essentially what they did was assassinate the heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary as a way of taking some of those Slavic regions and bringing them under their control. That's the spark that ignites the war. So be ready, though, at another time to kind of listen to that again, and then that's going to usher us into World War One. So anyway, hope you guys have a great day. You can follow along with, again, the PowerPoint. Hopefully that's helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. Have a great day.